The first of our community series matches are done. The Bombers and the Cats are now in the book. But what did we see? What did we learn? And ultimately, what can we take from this game to help us with our fantasy footy sides in 2025? Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. With every single game of this community series, we are going to be reviewing what went down to help you and your fantasy footy side. So thank you so much for tuning in on this extra special episode. We're going to keep them coming for you right throughout the rest of this community series. Look, there's a lot of players we've got to look at. There's a few we've got to talk about. Some myths we've got to dispel and some excitement that we've probably got to temper. There's a couple of players that are missing in this game that I think is worthy of talking through as we'll get through. But we learnt a bit. But right out of the gate, can I just put something on the agenda for you? There's about, in an AFL fantasy landscape, so SuperCoaches don't zone out on me, there's about a 500 points per team scoring deficit here. It's an absolutely gigantic number difference. That's not just a game style change. That's also one team wanting and doing something and the other like, we don't care. Like Essendon, almost 500 points more than the Cats is really indicative, meaning if you are only looking at fantasy scoring, and that being the indication of how you judge whether or not you should get a player, you might find yourself a little trapped up. It's why episodes like this, which are all about understanding role, what happened, and who to talk about, just make sure you're not getting led astray by a fantasy score more so than what actually went down. Let's start with Essendon. Maybe that's where we should go. They've got two pretty important defenders for us at the bottom end of the scoring tree. Reid, for me, just feels like a really safe defensive rookie that you can put on your bench. Ideally, you don't want him sitting on field, but given we're losing options to roll through there, I think he feels relatively safe to roll through there. Playing that lockdown role is getting a little bit of transition footy, but not too much, but looked pretty decent in this roll through there. So I didn't quite, I wasn't too disappointed about what I saw from Reid. Scoring is not going to be high. It was solid enough in this game, but roll and best 22 and score versus price point, I think it's going to be there. I thought he looked pretty good. The Cats do have a relatively decent tall forward line as well with the likes of Cameron and Neil. So he was busy. I thought he actually looked quite good in this game. So to me, if you're entering in with Reid in your side already, I'd be confident in that. If he's on field, it's probably a little thin as far as I'm concerned, but definitely if Reid wasn't in your team, he should be now. Alongside that was a Jackson Pryor, a little bit of a different role that was sitting in there, playing more, preparing to intercept, but also being a bit more of a dour defender at times. I could probably count on almost two hands moments when the switch was on for Essendon, and they just didn't use Pryor. For whatever reason, they took another avenue that was sitting there. And so while the scoring, again, you look at the scoring as an indication, it's solid without being spectacular. The role is absolutely here and right. And at his price point, to have him as your D6, let alone the opportunity to pair him with Reid, does feel pretty strong to me. They do have that early season bye, but we'll get a whole big look and chunk of what it all shapes out in opening round before we even have to get to that point. So to me, these are probably two of the more outstanding options that have presented themselves for us in this game. And to have them at a basement price or near basement price, depending on the format you play, I think structurally they both appear to be best 22. They both add something to this Essendon backline that they've been missing. So to me, I'm very, very happy and I'm very, very comfortable with what that game presented for us. Some other Bombers that are worthwhile talking about. I thought Sardis was pretty good. Some disposal efficiency there that at times let him down. Like, what are we talking about? It's not amazing with Sardis, but it was fine, specifically by foot, more so than by hand. They do have no Darcy Parish, at least early days. So that's something just to keep a factored eye on, because Merritt, quickly on him, he was cruising around in first gear, just running around for fun. If you were keen on him before today, you should not have seen anything that cooled you. Don't let a quote-unquote low fantasy or Supercoach score turn you away from Zach Merritt. It's absolutely fine. Sardis, I think, is an interesting one in Supercoach and Dream Team, where he's priced at a little bit more of an affordable space. I really probably might prefer him there in AFL Fantasy. In AFL Fantasy, he's competing with the likes of Hollands, Heatling, and people are already struggling to get Day, Hera, Oliver, and potentially a Dylan Shield all into this team. There's just not enough options. And Elijah does feel like the one in fantasy that's easy to go past. So I think in SuperCoach, despite that poor efficiency, he's one to consider. It'll a lot depend on his opening round score, the clarity of information of how far off is a Darcy Parish, because that midfield mix was interesting. It got experimented with in this game. Let's call it for what it is. Andrew McGrath was getting centre bounce presence in this game, and he hasn't done that before. And so and Ben Hobbs was also in there. Like, I'm not too sure we can really pull a lot of threads out of this Essendon midfield. There's so much that's unknown is probably the way to look at it. So back to Sardis on a minute. I think in fantasy, he's a shout, but he'd need to pop in opening round to really go there. I think it's much more likely the other format. Oh, Dylan Shield. If you're a super coach, you're not interested. You've just got zero interest at all. If you're letting the score of what he did in this game be the dictation to you. Look, 26 touches, 7 marks, but a 62 in SuperCoach and the fantasy ton. Look, he's got the role, okay? Look, and that's what we should be looking for in the preseason. He's got the role, but he's not being effective with ball in hand in contrast to a Nick Martin who was there 12 months ago. So, SuperCoaches, I don't think he were, but let's put it clean. If he pops a 110 in opening round, we have a decision to make. He's the one guy across my teams. I do not want to pick him, but the role is there and is his. And he was everywhere in that first quarter. The ball funneled and played all the way through him. They loved him with the ball. I just don't think he used it particularly well at all. And so he, like both these teams ultimately, opening round scoring, opening round teams determine a lot of who and how we select in these guys. But I do not want to pick Dylan Shield. But if he pops a 110, 120 in opening round across the formats, geez, that early price bump, that guaranteed 100 in the price cycle, it might be hard to go against it. And the early buy might just be the justification to get out quick. Other bombers that are important, I thought Ben Hobbs looked good in this game. I know people look at his points per minute, and again, we'll say that's fantastic. He was excellent. His time on ground was okay. Look, again, to me, they had an Andrew McGrath in at centre bounces. I still think they're experimenting with this midfield, remembering there's additional players on field that are coming in for the last quarter to third of the game just to give them, a go that are close to in and around the best 22. So I wouldn't say no, but I would be very, very cautious about what Hobbs could bring for us. Yes, he's cheap. Yes, he's in a line that would be of value for us and help for us. But I'm not sure there's enough for me that sits in the pocket of this. Isaac Kako was outstanding in this game. 4 goals, probably could have been 5 had it not been for a finger that got in the way of his shot on goal. Look, he's not going to kick 4 goals every game, but what he is going to do is he's going to bring heat, which he brought in this game. He's going to bring presence, and he does seem to read the ball pretty well at ground level, both off his opposition forwards and just in general open play. So I'm pretty comfortable. Super coaches, if you don't have him, I think he absolutely should be a forward bench option, and I really don't mind it in fantasy as well. We might get enough options that pop away that we don't need that option. We might get the Stones, we might get the Hewitts. Well, in fact, I think we get both of them. The Halls, the others that pop through. So we just might not need to go to a more upper end priced rookie, but we'll see. Supercoach, it's different because of the way the scoring is weighted and the things that he do, both from a defensive component and the score involvements, let alone his own scoreboard impact. These things are a bit more favourable. So look, don't expect him to get 4 goals and push that 100 marker like he did last night. But he was solid. He was good. I think they're the big ones to talk about. Look, Nick Martin's an absolute star. But if you go back to the video an audio episode we dropped a couple of days ago about the rules to watch, learn and observe about these preseason games, we talked a lot about players that score through transition are going to score really well in these bruise-free open games of football. That's exactly what happened in this game for Nick Martin, like 11 marks. I mean, come on. That's not only is that unsustainable, that's just not going to happen in an actual game of football with both teams going to compete for 4 points. Geelong, I don't even know if they got out of first gear tonight, let alone got into second gear. So with that points overarching differential, I'm not too... I'd be balanced in my perspective about Essendon, is probably the say the least. So the big takeaways for the Bombers before we get to the Cats. Pryor and Reid, the role is exactly what we'd been hearing about. Their scoring is going to be limited, but given the lack of options at this price range in our defensive line, and I think pretty good job security, if opening round score is at least solid, I'm pretty happy to venture into the start of the season with both those guys. Kako, I think, is someone you absolutely should have on your radar. Sardis, if the price is right, depending on the format, and then again, an opening round score that pops is there. And Dylan Shield, I don't like it, but if he delivers, because he does have the role, we might just have to fade into that space. Let's talk about the Cats. They are missing a couple of first-choice midfielders, Bailey Smith being the most notable of all of those. There are some other injuries to the likes of Manor, Bruin, that at time of recording haven't been really clear on when they're back. So there are a couple of midfield options. Guthrie's out for a much longer period than that. But really, Bailey Smith's the only midfield name that could come in and actually change some of this midfield dynamic up a little bit. Look, Bowes, Atkins, just jogging around the pace. There's a couple of guys that I think are really interesting to talk about for the Cats. Mitch Nevitt, for me, if he's not on your radar as a bench or M8 option, I think he needs to be. Some will be not as bullish on his game. He sort of spent a 50-50 split through the midfield. And then, look, his secondary role did look a little bit lost. He is a pure mid, undoubtedly, but, him on the outside, whether it be the flanks or the wing, it just didn't quite gel. But at his price point and the history of how Geelong like to develop their young midfielders, it does feel like he's in that spot to be able to be there. Look, 21 touches is a pretty decent game from him. I think he's an option, plain and simple. Look, I could probably sum up the video by saying, depending on what either of these teams do in opening round determines your selection. And it really, really does. But because they got both teams an early bye. But to me, I actually quite liked Nevitt's game here. He did nothing that made me cool on him whatsoever. I thought he was very good in his midfield time that he got, remembering bigger teams, more need, and teams are still experimenting as much as we might like to think this is their best 22. They've got more available to them than that. They can run deeper benches, wider rotations, experiment on a bunch of different things. All you can do is see with what you have seen. And for me, Mitch Nevitt, I thought he was really, really solid in his opportunities and has done all that I would have hoped. He's still is going to be sitting in my team. Sam De Koning, there's a little bit of confirmation bias I think might creep in for some people here. But flat out, two things. One, if he pops an 80 or a 90 in opening round, if you faded him now, you're jumping back on then because he actually has the role. Like 76% centre bounce presence here. So 2/3 of his game to 3/4 is spent at centre bounce. And so I loved that for him. We're not too infatuated about the score. Remember, the score really doesn't matter. And load on top of this. Last year, in the last, I think it's 10 games of 2024, the hardest team to score against for rucks was Essendon, who have arguably two first-choice options in Brian and then also in Draper. And so, to me, I'm really not worried or anxious at all in this spot for Sam De Koning because he has the role. Yeah, he flights and drifts and floats back a little bit, but again, aren't teams just experimenting? For him to be the highest centre bounce presence player for Geelong, and clearly ahead of the likes of Blixarves, clearly ahead of the likes of Neil. To me, I'm pretty confident that this is still the right selection moving forward. Of course, if he drops a 50 in opening round, that cash generation's not really going to get moving, so we may need to look elsewhere. But the role is there, and that's what we should be getting excited about. So to me, it's an opening round pick based on that, but the role is good, so I wouldn't get too worried about it. Who are some other Cats? Oh, geez, I didn't mind. I'm just looking over here at my notes. I actually quite liked Holmes. I think he showed us something again. Kind of got that split between halfback, a little bit of wing, and also playing through the midfield. I really, really liked the game from Max Holmes. There's something about him that just screams fantasy footy star about me. I really like him as an option. Works hard, gets into space, scores from transition. Now adding the ball-winning component to his game, I actually think there's something about a Max Holmes. If you're wanting a player in that premium range, is there. I know some would want to see what Bailey Smith and he look like combined before committing to it. And the good news is he can. Opening round is there. So I think Max Holmes is more of a player than people would probably want to give him credit for, and he sits in that pocket. But there's a guy that's got this history of near 100 averages over his career in AFL fantasy and 110s in SuperCoach that's probably been disrespected this pre-season. I'm talking about Tom Stewart. We were all worried, quote unquote, as a generalization about what the top-end premium defenders are going to do for us. Well, Tom's sitting in that space where he is the playmaker. He is the general. He is setting up this team wonderfully. He's back in that intercept and distribution role across halfback and as the third tall that we know is so favourable to him. So it's a little sneaky unique here because I think we've disregarded and frankly disrespected Tom Stewart, but he's in the role that he scores well. And if you don't want to go all the way up to Sheasley, you don't like the other options in the Sinclair, Whitfield, Zorko sort of range. Holmes you like but don't love. Sicily, you're worried about, is he going to get flung forward at the drop of a hat? Stewart looks pretty secure to me. And he's got the history and he's a separator that might just be the right move. And if it goes bad, no problem. The thing is, if he pops in opening round, the love will come for Tom. Again, that's why we look at role here. I liked his role. I think he's back in that spot that's really that generalist. I think he's going to be good. Look, there's not a whole heap of others that we really should be focused on. Look, Lawson Humphreys, I know he had some love in draft. I don't love it sitting in there. Connor O'Sullivan, we could probably cool on him and put just an absolute line through it. They do not need another 190-centimetre defender down back for Geelong. That was just purely experience, nothing more. I wouldn't be getting too excited or disappointed by that. I think it was a solid hit out. But all these players, opening round determines what they're going to be for you. But who stood out to you in this game? I'd love to know. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and let me know. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, you can get in touch with us across social media as well and get involved in the conversation as we review this game and start to think about what it looks like for our teams in just a couple of weeks' time. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you again real soon, looking at another of these community series games and what it means for our fantasy footy teams in 2025.